It began as one of those crisp December evenings when the air smells faintly of pine needles and chimney smoke. The neighborhood was quiet, serene, almost picture-perfect. The kind of street where every house looked like it belonged on a Christmas card. White icicle lights hung neatly from rooflines. Wreaths with velvet bows adorned polished front doors, and a thin dusting of frost made lawns sparkle under the street lamps. For years, this cul-de-sac prided itself on its peaceful atmosphere, a place where holiday decorations were tasteful, restrained, and uniform. Every December, the HOA sent out gentle reminders about sticking to neighborhood standards, which translated to no flashing neon lights, no inflatable Santas taller than 6 feet, and certainly no music synchronized to blinking displays. But one homeowner, a man who loved Christmas more than sleep itself, had grown tired of the monotony. While others hung their single string of lights and called it a season, he spent weeks planning a display that would dazzle the entire town. His driveway was lined with candy cane arches, the bushes shimmered with LED nets in every color imaginable, and the roof glowed with animated reindeer leaping in perfect sequence. Even the chimney had a glowing Santa halfway down, legs kicking. It wasn't gaudy to him. It was joyous. To him, Christmas wasn't about rules. It was about light in the darkness, about going big or going home. And go big he did, with a display so bright you could spot his house from 2 blocks away. The lights pulsed softly to Christmas carols, filling the night air with music and cheer. Children walking past would stop and stare with wide eyes, parents taking photos, cars slowing just to get a glimpse. But not everyone loved it. From the house directly across the street, a curtain twitched. A stern face peered through the glass, lips tightening into a thin line. This was Karen, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. She wasn't technically the HOA president, but you'd never know it from her behavior. Karen lived by the rules, enforced the rules, and expected everyone else to do the same. The lights offended her sense of order. They were too bright, too loud, too distracting. In her mind, they disrupted the neighborhood's perfect symmetry, drawing attention that didn't belong. The fact that children and families adored the display only seemed to make her angrier, as if joy itself was an act of defiance. At first, she sent polite notes, the kind written in all capital letters and signed with her full name, as if she were a judge passing sentence. When that didn't work, she called the HOA president, who promised to look into it. But Karen wasn't patient. Within days, she was on the phone with code enforcement, claiming the lights violated local ordinances. When that didn't produce immediate results, she began showing up uninvited, demanding that the display be turned off after sunset. Her visits were relentless. She'd march up the driveway, waving printed pages of rules and regulations, pointing to highlighted passages about excessive illumination and noise pollution. But the homeowner, calm and resolute, refused to back down. The lights stayed on, the music kept playing, and Karen's anger grew hotter than the bulbs lining the roof. Soon word spread. Neighbors began whispering about the feud. Some sided with Karen, saying the lights were a bit much. Others defended the homeowner, insisting that Christmas was supposed to be merry and bright. But everyone agreed on one thing: this was becoming the talk of the neighborhood. Karen escalated. She began taking photos, filing complaints, even calling the police to report a nuisance. When officers arrived, they found nothing illegal, just a house decorated to the extreme. They shrugged, smiled at the lights, and left, much to Karen's dismay. But Karen wasn't about to give up. She sent an official cease and desist letter, drafted by a lawyer friend, demanding that the lights be removed or face fines. The homeowner read it carefully, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer without responding. And that's when something changed. What had started as a simple holiday display, a few thousand lights, a few carols on a loop, now became something else entirely. It became a mission. If Karen wanted the lights off, he would make them brighter. If she hated the music, he'd make it louder. He'd turn his front yard into a winter wonderland so spectacular it would draw visitors from across the county. He ordered new supplies, high-powered floodlights, programmable LED panels, animated figures, and an industrial-grade sound system. The kind of gear you'd expect to see at a concert, not a suburban home. Delivery trucks rolled up day after day, unloading box after box, while Karen stood at her window, glaring with growing disbelief. By mid-December, the display was already massive, and he was just getting started. The entire house was wrapped in shimmering light, the roofline traced with dazzling neon, and the lawn transformed into a glowing carnival of color. Music blasted through hidden speakers, synchronized to every flicker and flash. Snowflake patterns danced across the driveway. Even the mailbox sparkled. People began driving from other neighborhoods just to see it. Cars lined the street at night, headlights dimmed, radios tuned to the broadcast signal so they could hear the music perfectly synced with the lights. Children pressed their faces to car windows, pointing and laughing, parents filming on their phones. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was an event, and Karen was furious. Night after night, she watched the crowds grow larger. Her quiet cul-de-sac had become a parade route, her front yard bathed in a kaleidoscope of color she couldn't escape. The flashing lights seeped through her curtains, keeping her awake, tormenting her. She called the HOA again. She called the city again. Still, no one shut it down. By the third week of December, the situation was reaching a boiling point. Karen was plotting her next move, convinced she'd find some way to put an end to it once and for all. What she didn't know was that the homeowner wasn't even close to done. He had one final upgrade planned, a centerpiece so bright, so spectacular, that even Times Square would look dim by comparison. And when that centerpiece lit up for the first time, the entire neighborhood would never forget it. The mysterious delivery on the front lawn became the talk of the block. Neighbors speculated endlessly about what could be hidden under that enormous tarp, stretched tight and secured with heavy straps. It was clear this wasn't just another string of lights or inflatable Santa. The homeowner across the street was planning something on a scale far beyond anything anyone had imagined. Every day brought more activity. Contractors arrived with ladders, tool belts clinking, unloading crates marked fragile electronics. Extension cords snaked across the yard like vines, connecting to power boxes reinforced with weatherproof covers. The air smelled faintly of solder and plastic, a sure sign that something industrial was being assembled. Karen, still watching from her living room window, felt her stomach twist with anger. The display had already become unbearable. The lights flashing in patterns so bright they cast multicolored shadows inside her house. The music booming through hidden speakers that vibrated her walls. Now, with this massive upgrade looming, she feared the entire neighborhood would become unlivable. And she wasn't entirely wrong. On the evening of the grand reveal, word spread quickly on social media. A single post from a local community page, "Something big happening on Cedar Lane tonight," drew dozens of cars, then hundreds. Families packed the sidewalks, children clutching candy canes, parents holding phones high to capture the moment. News crews parked their vans at the end of the street, setting up tripods to broadcast the event live. As the countdown began, the homeowner dimmed the existing lights for dramatic effect. The entire block went eerily quiet, waiting. Then, at the flip of a switch, the tarp dropped, and the neighborhood erupted in gasps. The centerpiece wasn't just a decoration. It was a full-scale, custom-built LED megatree, towering higher than the house itself, covered in programmable panels capable of displaying animations, text, and even short videos. The lights on the tree danced in perfect synchronization with the rest of the display, transforming the quiet cul-de-sac into a glowing concert venue. Images of Santa flying across the sky, snowflakes spiraling down, and holiday greetings scrolled across the massive screen, all timed to booming music broadcast on an FM channel. It was dazzling, it was overwhelming, and it was absolutely impossible to ignore. Cars backed up for blocks as people tried to get a glimpse. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing footage for YouTube channels and local news. Vendors sold hot chocolate from makeshift stands, turning the street into an unofficial festival ground. What had once been a neighborhood disagreement over tasteful decorations was now the biggest holiday attraction in the entire city. But while children squealed with delight and parents marveled at the spectacle, Karen seethed. This was no longer just about lights. This was personal. Her quiet street, once a model of order and restraint, had become a circus. She couldn't step outside without being blinded. She couldn't sleep through the pulsing glow. And everywhere she looked, she saw strangers parking on her curb, trampling her grass, blocking her driveway. Karen decided it was time for a direct confrontation. Late that night, after the crowds dispersed and the music finally stopped, she marched across the street and left another letter taped to the homeowner's door. But this time it wasn't a polite request. It was a threat, a promise to take legal action if the lights weren't turned off permanently. When that letter went unanswered, Karen escalated again. She filed an emergency petition with the city, arguing that the display created a public nuisance and endangered traffic safety. She even claimed that the lights could trigger medical emergencies for sensitive individuals. But her case was weak, and city officials, now basking in the positive attention the display brought, were reluctant to step in. The failure only fueled her rage. She started calling news outlets, trying to spin the story in her favor. She told reporters that her neighborhood had been hijacked by a reckless homeowner, that the lights were destroying property values, that the endless traffic was dangerous. But when news crews arrived, they weren't interested in Karen's complaints. They wanted footage of the spectacle. Smiling kids, glowing decorations, and the Christmas spirit that seemed to shine brighter than any regulation. Karen's attempts to play the victim backfired. Online comments mocked her. Memes circulated of a shadowy figure peeking through curtains, captioned, "Grinch alert." The more she complained, the more people came to see what all the fuss was about. The display wasn't just popular, it was viral. Local businesses even started sponsoring giveaways tied to the event. By the third week of December, the traffic was so heavy that police had to set up cones to control the flow of cars. Officers waved vehicles through with amused smiles, posing for selfies with kids under the neon glow. The city hinted it might even designate the display as an official holiday attraction next year. For Karen, it was unbearable humiliation. Her complaints were ignored, her warnings dismissed, and her reputation as the neighborhood's enforcer had crumbled in front of the entire community. But Karen wasn't finished yet. If the system wouldn't stop the lights, she would. Under the cover of darkness, she began walking the street late at night, studying every wire, every plug, every power source feeding the massive display. She learned where the cables ran along the grass, where the control boxes sat behind shrubs, where the extension cords snaked to hidden outlets. She began forming a plan, one that didn't involve phone calls or petitions. If she couldn't win this war legally, she'd end it herself. One way or another, those lights were going out. And as she plotted her midnight sabotage, the homeowner continued expanding the show, completely unaware that his brightest night of the season was about to be interrupted by something darker than he ever expected. The night Karen chose to act was colder than usual, the kind of sharp winter air that made every breath visible. The street, usually alive with holiday music and crowds, had finally gone quiet. After midnight, the glowing display across the street dimmed to a soft twinkle, its musical program set to rest until the next evening's show. For most neighbors, it was a peaceful lull before another night of celebration. For Karen, it was her chance. She dressed in dark clothes and slipped out her side door, hugging the shadows of her own driveway. The ground was frozen and crunched lightly underfoot as she crossed to the glowing house. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and anger. For weeks, she'd watched her neighborhood transform into a circus. She was determined to end it, even if it meant breaking the rules she had spent her life enforcing. Karen moved quickly, guided by memory. She had studied the layout of the display every night, memorizing where each cable ran and where each power box sat hidden among the decorations. She crouched beside a hedge and found the main extension cord feeding a row of giant candy canes. With a single tug, she disconnected it, plunging part of the lawn into darkness. The thrill was immediate. If it was this easy to cut off one section, how hard could it be to take down the rest? One by one, she yanked out cords, tripped breakers, and unplugged carefully concealed outlets. Whole sections of the display went dark. First the glowing driveway arches, then the animated reindeer, then the floodlit roofline. The cul-de-sac, once known as the brightest spot in town, faded piece by piece into shadow. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She wanted to take down the centerpiece, that massive LED tree towering over the entire block. She crept around the side of the house, searching for its main power source. That was when she found it, a weatherproof control box secured with a padlock. She cursed under her breath and yanked on the cords feeding into it, but they were reinforced and buried deep in the ground. There would be no quick sabotage of the main show tonight. Still, Karen's work left nearly half the display offline, and she retreated into the darkness with a smug sense of victory. By dawn, word spread quickly among neighbors. People woke up to find the once glorious display looking broken and incomplete. Some assumed it was a power failure. Others whispered about sabotage, and suspicion naturally fell on Karen, the only person vocal enough to hate the lights openly. The homeowner, far from discouraged, got to work immediately. He replaced damaged cords, resecured outlets, and upgraded vulnerable sections with heavy-duty locks and tamper-proof cases. By evening, not only was the display fully restored, it was bigger, brighter, and louder than before. He added new spotlights that illuminated the entire yard like daylight, ensuring that any midnight intruder would be visible from every angle. Karen watched from her window, furious that her efforts had failed so completely. Not only had she not stopped the display, but she had provoked an even grander response. The new lights blasted into her living room despite her heavy curtains, making sleep nearly impossible. The booming music carried farther than ever, as though daring her to try again. And then came the cameras. The homeowner, anticipating further sabotage, installed motion sensors and high-definition security systems throughout the yard. Anyone approaching the property at night would now be caught on film. Karen knew this made another late-night attempt risky, but she refused to give up. Meanwhile, the feud was no longer a private neighborhood issue. Social media was ablaze with stories about the Christmas house war. The viral videos of the glowing display now included speculation about mysterious vandals trying to shut it down. Online commenters mocked Karen mercilessly, even without naming her, posting memes of the angry neighbor who couldn't stop Christmas. Karen's anger deepened into obsession. If she couldn't destroy the display in secret, she would try to shut it down in broad daylight. She began circulating petitions again, demanding city action to stop the crowds, claiming the display caused car accidents, blocked emergency vehicles, and created unsafe conditions for residents. She even called the fire department again, this time alleging that overloaded circuits were a fire hazard. But her efforts backfired once more. Officials inspected the property and found everything up to code. In fact, the homeowner proudly showed them his upgraded wiring and reinforced safety systems. The display wasn't just legal, it was now one of the safest in the state. The failure sent Karen into a spiral. Her once tidy front yard was littered with tire tracks from visitors parking nearby. Trash occasionally blew onto her property from the constant stream of cars. And worst of all, she couldn't escape the glowing spectacle no matter how hard she tried. The lights reflected off her windows, the music seeped through her walls, and every passing vehicle slowed just long enough for someone to point and laugh at the sight of her scowling face in the window. Her patience snapped. If she couldn't outmaneuver the homeowner with legal action, and if sabotage wasn't possible without getting caught, she would have to confront him directly in front of everyone. On the night before Christmas Eve, the busiest night of the season, Karen stormed out of her house as the show began, just as a crowd of cars filled the cul-de-sac. Her angry gestures and furious shouting drew immediate attention from visitors and even local news crews. Cameras swiveled toward her as she marched up the glowing driveway, pointing accusing fingers at the towering tree and the man behind the display. The confrontation was chaotic, with bystanders recording every second, lights flashing, music blaring, and Karen's rage spilling over in full public view. And while she was busy berating the display under the glare of television cameras, something unexpected happened. A sudden pop echoed through the night, followed by a brief flicker in the lights. For a moment, the entire display dimmed ominously, as if something had gone wrong. Karen froze, convinced her sabotage had somehow worked after all. But this time it wasn't her doing. The display was about to face its first real crisis, one that neither Karen nor the homeowner saw coming. The pop echoed through the night like a firecracker, sharp and startling against the steady hum of Christmas music. For a brief moment, the towering mega tree dimmed, and the synchronized lights faltered. The crowd lining the street gasped, phones held high to capture what looked like the first real crack in the impenetrable holiday fortress. Karen stood frozen on the driveway, her face illuminated by the sputtering glow. She hadn't touched a single wire that night, yet the display seemed to be failing on its own. For the first time in weeks, she felt an unfamiliar rush of triumph. Perhaps fate itself had decided to intervene where her efforts had failed. But the darkness didn't last. The backup generators roared to life, flooding the yard with light even brighter than before. The music surged back with renewed force, as though mocking anyone who thought the show could be stopped. The crowd cheered, and Karen's fleeting moment of victory dissolved into a wave of humiliation. Every camera focused on her angry, stunned expression, capturing it for social media to dissect later. What no one knew at that moment was that the pop wasn't sabotage. It was a real malfunction. Somewhere deep in the maze of wires and power converters, a junction box had overheated under the strain of powering a display big enough to rival a city park. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was a warning sign. The lights were drawing far more electricity than they were designed to handle, and even the homeowner, who prided himself on planning every detail, hadn't anticipated just how much strain his masterpiece was placing on the system. As Karen retreated in anger, the homeowner got to work. He stayed up through the night checking connections, swapping out burned components, and adding yet another set of backup circuits. By morning, the display was running smoothly again, brighter and louder than ever. But behind the cheerful glow was a system running at its absolute limit, one small failure away from a complete shutdown. Word of the flicker spread quickly online. Videos of Karen's confrontation, and her triumphant expression turning to disbelief when the lights came back on, went viral. Memes labeled her the Grinch who almost stole Christmas. Strangers from miles away flocked to see the infamous house, and news stations ran segments on the neighborhood Christmas feud that had now become a full-blown holiday spectacle. For Karen, the humiliation was unbearable. Every time she stepped outside, she felt eyes on her. Neighbors avoided her gaze, no longer willing to stand by her side. Children pointed at her window and laughed. The HOA board, once sympathetic, now distanced themselves completely, saying the feud had gone too far and they would no longer intervene. Yet Karen refused to surrender. The flicker had given her hope. She became convinced that the display couldn't sustain itself. If the homeowner kept pushing his system past its limits, it would eventually fail on its own. All she had to do was wait, and maybe give fate a little nudge. She began watching the house more closely than ever. She noted when the lights seemed to strain, when certain sections dimmed just slightly, when the music lagged for half a beat. She learned when the homeowner left to buy supplies, when delivery trucks arrived, and when the yard was empty. She still considered sneaking back under cover of darkness, but the new cameras made it far too risky. Meanwhile, the homeowner pressed forward with reckless enthusiasm. He installed additional strobes, a larger sound system, and even a fog machine that sent glowing mist rolling across the lawn. His mission was no longer just about celebrating Christmas. It was about proving that no one, not even the most relentless neighbor, could bully him into dimming his holiday spirit. But the strain was growing. By Christmas Eve, the electrical load was so high that lights occasionally flickered even with the upgraded wiring. The homeowner shrugged it off, confident his system could handle anything. Crowds filled the street in record numbers, hundreds of cars inching past, reporters broadcasting live segments, drone footage capturing the cul-de-sac transformed into something brighter than Times Square. Karen watched from her window, her anger now laced with a sense of inevitability. She could feel something coming. The display had grown too big, too unstable. And if it failed, truly failed, it wouldn't just be a quiet inconvenience. It would be spectacular. As the evening reached its peak, the music swelled, the mega tree flashed with dazzling colors, and the synchronized lights danced in perfect harmony. The crowd applauded, car horns honked in celebration, and the homeowner basked in the glory of his defiance. But then, just as the grand finale was about to begin, the moment when the entire yard would erupt in a blinding cascade of light, another sharp pop cracked through the cold air. This time, it wasn't a single flicker. Entire sections of the display went dark all at once. The mega tree froze mid-animation. The music stuttered, then died completely. Gasps rose from the crowd. Drivers rolled down windows, confused. Children looked disappointed. Cameras captured every moment as the homeowner rushed around the yard, frantically checking connections. Karen stood at her window, heart pounding with a strange mix of exhilaration and fear. For a few tense minutes, the entire street was silent except for the homeowner's footsteps crunching across frozen grass. Then, faintly, the lights came back. Not fully, but in uneven patches, dimmer than before. The grand finale sputtered rather than soared, and the once perfect show limped to a close under the watchful eyes of hundreds of spectators. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring about the malfunction. Some wondered if the show would be repaired in time for Christmas morning. Others speculated that the system was finally burning out. Karen, though she hadn't lifted a finger, felt vindicated. To her, this was proof that the homeowner's pride was unsustainable, that his obsession had finally caught up to him. But the homeowner wasn't done yet. He vowed to fix everything before the biggest night of all. What Karen didn't know, and what he hadn't fully realized, was that his desperate repairs would push the system past its breaking point, setting the stage for one last night of chaos that the entire state would remember. The final week before Christmas arrived like the calm before a storm, though nothing about the neighborhood felt calm. Cars lined the streets every evening, their headlights blending with the shimmering glow of my holiday display. Families from other towns came just to see the spectacle. The synchronized lights dancing to music, the artificial snow cascading across the lawn, the life-sized reindeer that actually moved their heads in rhythm to Jingle Bell Rock. What had started as a simple string of bulbs was now a production so massive it could have doubled as an amusement park. And Karen hated every second of it. Her complaints had grown more desperate and unhinged. She wrote to the HOA 3 times a day, demanded emergency meetings, and even called local news stations to expose what she called a public nuisance. But instead of rallying support, her efforts backfired spectacularly. Every negative thing she said on camera only drew more curious visitors. People wanted to see the lights so bright they blinded a neighbor. My display went from neighborhood gossip to regional headline, a must-see Christmas event that local papers couldn't stop talking about. By mid-December, the HOA's patience was unraveling. They issued threats of massive fines, citing obscure clauses about light pollution and excessive foot traffic. But by then, I was far past caring. The more they pushed, the more determined I became to outshine them. Literally. I rented industrial spotlights, the kind used at grand openings, and mounted them in the front yard to sweep the night sky with glittering beams. I added massive LED panels that displayed animated holiday scenes. A local electrician even volunteered his time just to keep the power grid from buckling under the load. What was supposed to be a humble house in a quiet cul-de-sac now glowed so brightly that pilots reported seeing it on approach to the nearby airport. Meanwhile, Karen's fury reached a boiling point. She started recording videos from her driveway, ranting into her phone about the assault on her retinas, screaming about lawsuits and health hazards. Her tirades became internet comedy gold. Memes of her shouting in front of my glowing display spread like wildfire on social media. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was infamous. The night before Christmas Eve, the situation exploded. The HOA arrived in force, flanked by private security guards. They attempted to block off my driveway and shut down the show. But when they tried to cut the power, they discovered that I'd already rerouted the system through a separate generator parked discreetly behind the garage. Nothing they did could stop the lights from blazing. The crowd cheered as the display surged even brighter, the music swelling, the synchronized strobes pulsing with defiance. Karen shrieked from across the street, waving legal papers, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of holiday music and the cheers of the onlookers. Then something unexpected happened. A local TV crew, the same one Karen had called weeks ago, showed up to film live coverage. But instead of siding with her, they interviewed families who'd driven hours just to see the lights. Parents talked about how magical it was, how their kids' faces lit up with joy. Vendors arrived selling hot chocolate and candy canes to the growing crowd. What the HOA had called a nuisance had transformed into a beloved community event, one the entire town now defended. On Christmas Eve, the biggest crowd yet gathered outside my house. Hundreds of people filled the streets, carolers sang, and even the mayor showed up to take photos under the glowing archway I'd built over the driveway. The HOA president tried one last desperate plea to shut it all down, but with cameras rolling and public opinion squarely on my side, their threats carried no weight. No one wanted to be the villain shutting down Christmas for the kids. Karen stood at the edge of her lawn, seething with silent rage as the clock struck midnight. When the final light sequence ended with a massive burst of sparkling fireworks. Yes, I added those too. The crowd erupted in applause. It was more than just a victory over petty complaints. It was a celebration of standing up to control, of refusing to let one bitter voice ruin the joy of an entire community. By the time the season ended, my house had been featured on national television. Donations from visitors more than covered every HOA fine they tried to throw at me. Local businesses even offered sponsorships for next year's display, promising to make it bigger than ever. As for Karen, she stopped calling the news. She stopped writing letters. She even stopped coming out of her house during the evenings, retreating behind blackout curtains to hide from the glow. In trying to extinguish my holiday cheer, she'd accidentally made it burn brighter than ever. And as the final lights came down in January, one thing became perfectly clear. Sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable demands isn't to dim your shine. It's to turn it up so bright the whole world can see.